Good afternoon. This is part 2 of the sun energy harvested. This teleclass is something that I've worked on quite a bit in researching things and getting further into this residue management things of how can we harvest this year's sun energy that went into photosynthesis to get next year's crop to grow that much better. You know, it is very true. I was told many times by several of my mentors that taught me over the years, 30-some years ago, remember, Edwin, plants do not read college textbooks. This is not to slam against colleges at all, but it is the fact that we have to learn what the plants actually do and need and want, not just what we think that they do. And it is also true that N, P, and K is by themselves a system that is very grossly inefficient and broken. That does not mean that N, P, and K are not valuable. But if we really want to harvest the sun, we really want to get the maximum out of the sun, we're going to have to look at, all right, so what happens during the plant's growth? And so that's where I go next with my talk here is photosynthesis. Now that's a big, long word that many people have a vague idea. It's how the sun gets things to grow, you know. In real crude sense, it's basically sun energy meets the leaf, and on the bottom of the leaf, we call that the stomata, which is a lot of tiny holes on the bottom of the leaf. It has receptors of things such as carbon dioxide for one, and other things. You combine that with the sun energy beating on top of the, or shining on top of the leaf, and then there's a metabolic reactor going on. It's kind of like a solar panel, if you will, in electronics. It's receiving the sun and turning it into energy. This energy, however, is expressed by helping develop new cells. Now, in that process, I didn't talk about N, P, or K, nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. I did not talk about any of those things. What I did do was talk about that photosynthesis that makes this really work. And so when we look at what this is all about, we really want to make sure that we end up with understanding if we want to harvest the sun energy, we have got to capture the good things that happen during photosynthesis. And what's interesting is these things that come together in making the cells are lighter than air. What I mean by that, if I can describe the word lighter than air, I'm literally talking about something that is really, truly lighter than air. And if something is lighter than air, what happens with it? It wants to go up, just like helium gas does in a helium balloon. It wants to go up. And that's something that's pretty critical to understand. When we look at that kind of a phenomena, we are looking at the ability to get the aspect of helium gas balloon, keeping it from going up kind of a thing. Or in other words, this kind of lighter than air, if it goes through a rotting cycle or decomposing cycle, whether it's out in the field or in the windrow, it's going to go away from you. And I'd like to quickly relate this story. Many of you have heard this, but this Flemish physician, several hundred years ago, a long time ago, planted a 5-pound sprig tree into exactly 200 pounds of soil. In 5 years, dug the plant carefully out, weighed the soil, made sure he got the roots uncovered with soil and sifted through to get the roots out. And that pot now weighed 2 ounces less than 200 pounds, 199 pounds and 14 ounces. So when you stop and think about what just is happening here, it is phenomenal. That means that only 2 ounces came from the soil, and 159-pound gain. I should have said that earlier. The tree now weighed 164 pounds instead of 5. That means the starting weight of 5 and the ending weight of 164 is a 159-pound gain. So at that 159 pounds of gain, we are actually talking about something that's pretty phenomenal, because that means all the other ounces in that tree came from something that's lighter than air. Get that, folks? That's the key to unlocking the understanding how to harvest more sun energy. It is so exciting when you stop and think about it. So let me reiterate this aspect about that 2,544 ounces of gain, which is 16 ounces times 159 pounds. So now we have 2,542 that was lighter than air. Now when that tree, that 164-pound tree, starts rotting and decomposing in a compost windrow, for example, just as a hypothetical example, guess what? 2,542 ounces are susceptible to go up in the air unless we capture it. No, not quite all of that will go up in the air. Some of it turns into inert. I get that all. But listen, most of that valuable sun energy that really makes a difference, that will be lost. And so when we talk about harvesting the sun energy, I'm going to first talk about it from a farmer's point of view. So a farmer, he's out here, he's harvesting his crops, whether it's hay, whether it's produce, whether it's nuts off of a nut tree, whether it's apples off an apple tree, whether it's pumpkins, whether it's corn or soybeans or millet or sorghum, any of these crops, right after harvest, they are applying a liquid humus extract. A liquid humus extract contains humus protein. They're applying it to the existing plant residues before they start rotting immediately after harvest. They go out there and they spray it right on top. In some cases, for no-till, for example, they don't even work it in. I prefer that they roll it in, or that they shred it down, or whatever they can do if they're no-till. But nonetheless, getting it on there is what's important. Then when it rains, it'll get that stuff in contact with the soil and start decomposing it, because what we want is that residue to rot, but not all evaporate. So inside this humus protein extract, you've got the protein. That protein is the home, the caretaker, the caregiver, the care feeder of the microorganisms. It keeps them happy, so that the more than 1,000 species can live side by side without fighting each other, without cannibalizing each other, and being comfortable. And how do they do that? It helps them be contented while being in idle, which is perfect. That's the way God designed the natural system. And then when that plant calls for it, they'll ram up and start mutating, and metabolic activity skyrockets up, and then away it goes. So again, this humus protein is to help microbes control their life cycle, to help microbes expand when asked upon, to dwindle down and yet not completely die off when asked to throttle back, so the other microbes can do their thing, etc. But we then put an activator in with this called N-converter, and this activator is putting it in with that extract, and it does 3 things. It activates it. It keeps it from it helps capture the volatile compounds, the lighter than air compounds, which allows the material to not evaporate back up in the air. But lastly, it is a facultative bacteria, which means it can live with or without oxygen, and yet it does not allow pathogen microbes to actually proliferate. So it's only going to allow the good guys to expand. And so what we've got going on is these people put on a quart of the N converter for every 10 gallons, and the normal rate is 10 to 15 to 20 gallons per acre, depending on the crop and budget. They're going to spray on that crop residues. And that means that you will store some of that sun energy until next year, which it turns around and it strengthens your soil structure, loosens your soil. In other words, it stores that energy in that soil, and that simply starts your soil becoming new ground again. And so that's part of the harvest of the actual sun harvest, of getting this into the soil. It is so critical. I cannot overemphasize this. When you want to harvest the sun energy, you really got to do things different than think about just N, P, and K. You got to do the stuff that's lighter than air and capture that component. When you can capture that component, we're all in great shape and making things happen. We are excited about having people do that. We've had so many different trials and successes as a result of that. It's becoming quite exciting. Let's continue now into this same aspect of harvesting the sun out of the ingredients that we have in our compost windrow. And when we do that, we end up actually making this work in the compost windrow so that we are able to capture the things that are decomposing or rotting there. Again, these cells open up. Remember, most of it came from the air, and lighter than air substances built that cell structure, or that mass, and weight came from things that came together. So we want to take that material and we want to turn it into a humus protein. So how do we do that? We first have to capture it. We cannot allow it to escape. We can't allow it to evaporate. So we have this N converter, and this N converter puts out a negative ionic charge substance that really causes the volatile compounds to attract to it. A different way to say it is the VOCs, the volatile oxidizing compounds, slow down significantly. In fact, you can easily smell the difference of losing it versus putting it on and not losing it. And I do not have time on this call to relate several different experiences that were quite fun and pretty dramatic that really cut the odor out. Well, it's cutting out the volatile compounds. So we do use the N converter in the compost windrow to help that. The other thing is we use clay soil to be more exact. This could be topsoil clay soil, or it could be subsoil clay soil. Either one. We typically add this into the windrow at between 10 and 15% by volume to make sure we do not lose that sun energy that went into growing the material, that plant matter that you have in the windrow. And so then we capture it. That's our capturing program. Then what we do then, after the first, second, or third week, we start in with and sometimes it's all the way to the fourth week, we start in with a different product and inoculate the compost windrow with a different product. Is called humifier. And all those microbes can do is put things together. Most microbes take things apart. These do not. These sets of microbes are specifically designed so uniquely that when they get done eating, there's less pieces, not more. There's many tiny pieces brought together into a bigger piece. And this is the bringing together of the humus protein function that comes from that sun energy we captured. Then after that, the third inoculant is to antagonize the second inoculant called humifier. It's to enhance that protein formation into a stronger protein. So again, we have 3 sets of inoculants to try to harvest the sun and convert it to a true protein. This all is in line with then ending up with what we call humus protein. Humus protein, in essence, is sun energy stored in a protein. It is that simple. It's an interesting thing. I want to relate one more thing about this protein, and then I'll end up opening it up for questions. The aspect about protein, and specifically the humus protein, it is so vast And it is so critical to understand that there's no way that you can have more functional type of protein when you have the humus type of protein. In 1924, through a series of over 6 years of soliciting scientists from all over the world, there became a convention together that lasted 6 days, Monday through Saturday, in New York City. In 1924, they had 76 scientists from 66 countries. These people all came by boat or traveled, and in that case, of course, they could have also come by train and so on. But they gathered together for one purpose, and that is so that we can end up describing what is humus. This was a humus symposium / convention. And I want to interrupt right now. Kelly, there's some static on the line. Can you see which one needs to be muted? Thank you. And so I want to continue with this convention. They came up with 105 definitions of humus. And what I relate that story to is they wanted to have less definitions, not more. It is a testament to how thoroughly complex and thoroughly furnished, if I can say it that way, that the microbes have it when they have a humus protein. It is truly an amazing feat to see how massively vast this humus protein can be. Now, Kelly, we still have some noise coming through. Thank you. And so when I go back to what is humus, it is a vast, molecular, scientifically hard to examine all aspects of it. It's almost like examining life itself, but it is so vast that it keeps all the microorganisms, different species, happy with each other without fighting each other, contentedly working with each other without fighting each other. That's amazing. And so I want to make one last example. Most people think the life in the soil requires every species of microorganisms to rise up and be working at high metabolic activity, like they all got to work hard. That is absolutely not the truth, and I often give an example, and I'll give an abbreviated one of this. Imagine a room that's 50 foot square inside a building with no furniture. You stack that full of people that are side to side, standing upright. They're probably 3 inches away from the wall and 3 inches away from each other. And then you do another row of people that are about 6 inches in front of them. And you stack that whole full room full of people. I don't know how many hundred of people would actually stand in there, and I'd sure get claustrophobic. But I have an example here. Let's assume that you could put 200 people in there, just to pick a number. And now give them all a jump rope and ask them to all jump rope at the same time. Everybody knows that's not possible. But back away a bunch of them and squish them together, get them a lot closer for a little bit, and allow 10, 20, or 25% of them to do their jump roping, and then they go back and squish against the wall, then some more can jump rope, and then some more, until they all do their thing. Well, that is a bad example in one sense, but truly in nature, that's how it should be. You only have certain microbes that expand while others are idling. And yet, if you don't have a substance like protein, they don't just idle, they die down. And so that's not what we want. We want viability, yet in idle. We want it to be able to expand within 72 hours to the number that it needs to have, and in another 72 hours to be back down in idle with very little numbers so that it can give way for the next group of microbes. And so this process of harvesting sun is about harvesting the sun energy, feeding it to my microorganisms, feeding it to the fungi, the different interactions that we need into the root zone for next year's crop. And when you do that, you end up with an extremely beneficial, high-level performance crop. you end up with a crop that is buffered against the weather extremes. You end up with a crop that becomes easier to have higher yields and not struggle with it popping out of the ground and growing fast. You end up with a crop that is not attractive to insects, etc. It is great. And one last example of that is let's say you and I, we would have started in 2017. We would have started this program in the field. We would have started using humus compost that we make by making that humus protein form. And we've been doing that for 5 years now. Listen, this summer we would have gotten close to 75% of last year's sun energy, 50% of 2020's, at least 30% of 2019's, at least 20% of 2018, and at least 10% of 2017. What I'm trying to accumulate to you is to give you the vast potential. This stuff doesn't just help for next year. It helps the next 5 years. And once you get the ball rolling, it is truly a ball that's rolling in your favor. How can I get more excited about this? It is about taking your inputs, leveraging them to work for you in addition to what you already are putting on your land. You're borrowing from your investment in the past to help with today's inputs. That's how you get your inputs to come down per unit of volume that you produce in the crop, or pounds, or whatever measurement you use, whether it's boxes in produce, etc. And so these are the exciting times of starting to realize we can truly let nature really make it work for us. And so with that, Kelly, can we go ahead and open things up for our few minutes here before we close?
Yes. Let me get these people unmuted and we can ask some questions. Okay, so everybody is unmuted now. If you have a question, please ask. Does anybody have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. Dave Stolzfus.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Dave.
So we're still extremely dry here, and we're harvesting. Do you put the residue is your residue management the same when the ground's extremely dry as if there's adequate moisture?
As long as you have enough protein in your extract, I would continue on as before. When it wants rains, you have it.
Okay, thanks.
I would like to relate this to you. Penn Valley was just extremely dry, and I was there actually. I think it was the 5th and 6th of September, and I kept telling him in August, well, someday it's going to rain. Yeah, but we need it now, and I agreed with him 100%. And he said, well, it's too dry to plant my cover crops. We're already harvesting some, but it's just plain too dry. And I said, Jonathan, I would go ahead and plant and hope it will rain, and then you'll be very happy you got it. And sure enough, it did. It really did rain. So I would just encourage you the same way. Someday it will rain. Just continue on.
Thanks.
You're very welcome. Anyone else?
This is Matthew Yoder. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Matthew. Go ahead.
Okay, I remember a couple calls back, somebody asked the question about carbon, and I suppose it relates to all the carbon markets and all the things that are going on politically. And you just briefly touched on it and asked that he would ask the question again the next time so that it could be on the recording. So I just thought I'd ask that question.
All right. Well, thank you for doing that. I would like to respond to that by clarifying. He was talking about how much do I focus on carbon credits and or documenting the accumulation of carbon. And my answer was, I do not have a handle on where the government and or the carbon bank people are paying for carbon, so I'm not the expert on that. But I would like to make this comment. Without carbon, no life exists. And so carbon is the skeleton of life. I prefer focusing on doing the right thing, accumulative massive carbon, but not let that be my focal point. My focal point is to harvest more sun so that I can get more for changing my soils, for improving my crops, for getting the quality up, etc. And that cannot happen without carbon being part of it. I would simply say on this recording, by only focusing on the carbon, we're missing a big piece of the bigger picture. Let's not miss that bigger piece, and yet know full well that carbon is extremely valuable and a vital portion of that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right,
Thank
next
you.
question.
Something to that.
Sure, go ahead.
My name's Tom Wood. I'm out here in Idaho. When it comes to I get questioned the carbon sequestering thing and the carbon market and what is developing or burgeoning here. And I feel like as farmers, we need to be a little bit, careful on where we're putting our focus there. That as farmers, the carbon has more value to us in our crop production if we're cycling that. We don't necessarily want to get focused on shoving it in the ground and trying to get a payment for that. I feel we need to focus on how do we put that into the cycle. How do we get the plants to put the carbon in the ground? How do we get the microbes to cycle this back out? So on my own farm, my own thing, I'm not paying a lot of attention to the carbon markets. I'm just trying to focus on cycling carbon. How do I do this to put it back to my plants? Because at the end of the day, that's still my biggest return on investment. So.
Oh, that's exciting, and I appreciate your input, Tom, and I agree with that 100%. I think some of this is changing some of the farmers' focus, where in the end they're being very astute in how to handle carbon credits and get paid for it, but they're not necessarily improving their entire farm operation to make it more sustainable, is what I have observed.
Yep.
Thank you for that. One last question, and then we'll go ahead and come off of the call.
Yeah, Matthew, again, I would ask in relation to that question, how do you encourage that carbon cycling?
All right. We've got a process here and that's a very good question, Matthew. We've got a process here of residue management, getting it back in a digestible form that we did not allow it to blow up into the air. We want to capture things. We want to hold it for next year's crop. Exactly what we've been talking about on this call. That is about getting that carbon to really go back into your next year's crop. Maybe I should expand on that, Matthew. Carbon as itself, as an element, has so many forms. You've got carbon dioxide. That means that's a gas. You have a diamond on the other extreme. A diamond is just a hard piece of carbon that's extremely refined and tough. That is really, really tough. Okay, so can you eat diamonds? Can you grow things off of diamonds? No. It is that functional carbon that we're talking about, or that what Tom was alluding to. It's that carbon that we're actually looking to really make and harvest for our own good. So, yes, thank you for asking that. All right, with that, I think we'll sign off. We're past our 30 minutes. I appreciate everyone doing this, and we want to make sure that any questions, feel free to call our office. Stay tuned for our next series. We've got another exciting teleclass coming up. I started getting so full of ideas that I can't hardly wait to each teleclass. So thank you so much. We'll talk to y'all later. You have a blessed day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.